I will introduce Thomas, and we'll get started so that we're not waiting too much longer, and I'll let people in as they arrive. But thank you very much for joining us. As I said, I'm Isaac. Well, I didn't say, but I'm Isaac, and I'm joining you from Canberra in Australia. With me are my Hub team core members. We've got Martin and Marielle with us, and Joss and Roma from the SI Hub core team as well. Nairobi, welcome. Very much so. And just want to introduce Thomas. We're actually quite excited to hear from Thomas today, particularly because Singapore is quite advanced in the application of systems thinking in the public sector. They've been doing it for quite some time now, and it is a bit of a different perspective from what we've generally explored in the Governance Hub. So we're very keen to hear from his experience. He is the Dean of the Centre for Systems Leadership at the Systems Innovation Network partner organisation called the the Singapore Institute of Management, or SIM. He's going to provide, as I said, a history of systems thinking in the Singaporean public sector, talk about how public servants are trained in systems thinking and the effect that this has had on some of the agencies that he is aware of and has served in himself. Also include some case studies so we can see how it's been applied. It'll be about 40-minute presentation followed by some Q&A, probably 10-15 minutes. Feel free to drop questions in the chat if you aren't in a position to turn your microphone on, but we absolutely welcome people talking and interacting, and in fact we'd encourage it. I'll jump back in at the end, but I'll hand now to Thomas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isaac, and good afternoon, everyone. It's 5 o'clock here in Singapore, in case you're wondering, and I'm just going to share my screen so that we can look at the slides together. Trust this is now visible to you, right? So I'm just going to get started, yeah? Right. So, yeah. Isaac introduced me briefly, and I am the Dean for the Center for Systems Leadership in SIM Academy. And I spent for a good part of my life in the public sector myself, right? So I spent 20 years in various government statutory boards, like the Infocom Development Authority, the Media Authority, and Sports Singapore. Prior to that, I was working in the private sector, the old like Anderson Consulting, if you remember that, and now called Accenture, Gartner, and Singtel, which is our national telecom company. So after I finished my stint in the public sector, I came out to become a trainer, coach, consultant, and ended up with SIM a few years back. So that's a little bit about me. So this is SIM, in case you're wondering. All right, we have 2 campuses at Clementi and Namly. These are 2 different locations. So it's been around for 60 years. So it's even, been longer than Singapore has being independent as a country. Pretty much, that's what it is, right? So it has been around very much in the management space, but more recently it has become more, I would say, commercially oriented in terms of being able to provide not just education for undergraduates, but also for the working professionals, which we term it as continuing education. So my role at the Center for Systems Leadership deals with working professionals, right? So these could be anywhere from the new executive in the organization to the C-suite. They all come for different types of programs in the SIM campus. So just a little bit about who we are. Basically, we are a training organization of sorts, and we basically are in the business of using methodologies, case studies to create an applied learning environment for our learners, right? So as I mentioned, there are 2 lines of business. I'm not involved in the undergraduate and advanced diploma side of the house. I'm more into the professional development, right? So Singapore context setting for systems thinking and where we think we would land. These are two excerpts, if you like, that I took from fairly recent occurrences. So Mr. Lawrence Wong, our Prime Minister, fairly new to us as a Prime Minister, but what he said in 2023 then was that there's an emphasis on cross-domain holistic policy making efforts needed that is needed for social and economic endeavors. And due to the complexity of these interrelated issues, so we have ministerial positions, very senior ministerial positions that are called coordinating ministers. All right, so they coordinate across different ministries to ensure this holistic or holism efforts, which is like the way we would call it as systems approach, right? And one other minister in our public service division, in other words, the person looking at all the civil servants and public servants, says that we need to evolve beyond purely interagency coordination. So this is way back in 2018. And we want to go from whole of government to whole of nation, where stakeholders go beyond basically the public sector, right? So this is where the interfaces with the private sector, the academia, the social service, and so on and so forth are kind of like all interrelated. So that's kind of like the backdrop to paint the picture that we are quite aware as a nation in terms of the need to, cut across whichever silos that you think exist and give a coordinated effort in terms of trying to manage this complexity. So in terms of systems thinking, I think we could date it back 20 plus years, certainly closer to 30 rather than 20. The Economic Development Board in Singapore was one of the first users of systems thinking. And this gentleman here in the picture, Mr. Daniel Kim, I think he hails from MIT. So he has done work with Peter Senge and the fifth discipline. So he's translated a lot of that work, that body of work, into system models. I believe we would call it system dynamics today, right? But it is really about the interrelations of using causal loop diagrams, what he calls levels of perspective, hierarchy of choices, a whole lot of models that has been translated from the fifth discipline and other aspects of systems dynamics. He has put it out in terms of a course that can be delivered to a group of learners. So he's been doing this, on a regular basis for our Singapore public sector for a good, I'd say 20 years, right? And some of the companies or organizations on the left-hand side have been doing it even today, all right? So the military, which is the Singapore Armed Forces, Singapore Police Force, all right, where I joined, and we had Daniel Kim for a good 6 years, all right? So every cohort is a 1-year program. Sport Singapore had him for 6 years from 2014 to about 2020, 2024, but there were some COVID years. The Early Childhood Agency. From where I sit, the right-hand side represents some of the companies that I've been training in the public sector. So the BCA, which is the Building Construction Agency or Authority, People's Association, which I'll say a little bit more about as a case study. Civil Service College, which basically is the, if you like, the training arm of the entire public sector, right? We're working with them in terms of curating a program that would be like a master class that culminates in an advanced diploma of sorts that we would like to deliver to our public servants, those who are directors and above. National Council of Social Service, NCSS for short, that deals with the social sector, all right? And there are about, there's at least 100 agencies there, that deals with anything from dementia to active aging to children as a target audience to Cancer Society and so on and so forth, right? So we do quite a bit of work with NCSS, and that model is very interesting, which I will share with you also. In the private sector, we work with our if you like, the train companies, so Singapore Mass Rapid Transit, so our MRT systems, right, our bus systems, they are the provider. NUHS is a healthcare organization. And then we have a bunch of other private sector tech companies, the NCS, which is a fairly large local systems integrator company, Accenture, NTT Data. All right. So this represents kind of like a distribution of the types of companies, and fairly large ones, that have adopted systems thinking to fairly large extent within the organization. Right. And we do multi-year work with them. SMRT, for instance, we are into our 4th or 5th year. And just to say that the Center for Systems Leadership is only started 5 years ago. So it's like one of our first customers, and continues to send cohorts of their staff to our training, once a month, right? So you can think about 12 cohorts a year times 5 years. So they are fairly committed to making the vocabulary of systems thinking something that is pervasive in the organization, that backs up their systemic structures, and the use of the vocabulary is very important in any transformation work, right? And that's where we are in terms of the spread of systems thinking. There are a lot more, but I've highlighted these because they have a fairly high adoption rates, and a couple of them I'll be saying a little bit more in detail. So when we coined systems leadership, we just meant the ability for leaders to use systems thinking in their day-to-day work. Systems leadership is not a SIM term, but we have adopted it, and we use it extensively in our correspondences and literature. But as you know, systems leadership just meant for all of us who are leading organization teams or even self, the kind of if you like, a way of approaching problems and how we solve them. So in our programming, we look at leading self, leading teams, leading organizations, all right? And the focus areas would differ depending on this, if you like, hierarchy of influence, right? So if you're leading self, the systems thinking is more about self-awareness, growth mindset, emotional resilience, less on the systems models. Leading teams, we use a lot of systems models, so that's on team effectiveness, all right? Coaching as well. And when you're leading organizations, we will look at systems thinking in terms of like vision deployment metrics, stakeholder management, and so forth, right? So these are the common themes that we have seen being asked of from the public sector themselves. So yesterday I was in a conversation with the Civil Service College, and we were talking about, given the nature of work, and of course everybody talks about the growth of AI, but we're also talking about things like what does it mean for the public sector to show the way in terms of having, fractional workforce, all right? How does that look like when people are, deployed for 40% of their time and 30% in another company, perhaps, or in another agency, and then you undertake projects here with another partner for the rest of the 30%. What does that look like from a employment viewpoint, from a societal viewpoint? This makes for very interesting conversations as we look at how manpower concerns are being addressed in the light of artificial intelligence, right? So we also do something called ecosystem level facilitation. So like, for example, the social service sector, we brought together 30 of the CEOs and said, what does it mean for us to look at shared services from a technology viewpoint? Because each of you are too small to, invest in your own technology, right? As a social sector player, you are very conscious of the fact that donors want the donations to go to beneficiaries as much as possible. So how do we work with the government? How do we work with tech partners? How do we work with the different boards, right, on financial sustainability governance, all right, in terms of what sort of products and services? So SIM bigger purpose, apart from the capability development of running courses and all that, is to facilitate some of these system-wide conversations that includes government representation, union representation, and also the stakeholders from the different walks of life, so to speak. But most of the work is still centered around capability development. Having said that, and we look at the CEO as a integrator of their vision and mission, right? So this cycle just basically illustrates the types of things he needs to integrate and how systems thinking can help him in designing a system of work that would make sense for him to be able to effectively drive transformation. All right. So we hear the key challenges, whether it's private or public sector, about long-term intent and short-term metrics. I spoke to the point about common language. Also, the ability to move across silos is a very big challenge for many organizations, because the metrics determine how you work and who you work with. All right. So that's part of the thing that we try to crack in terms of bringing systems thinking into organizations, not just the dissemination of the knowledge and skills, but the ability to solve their real organization business issues. Just to say that these are the types of short form courses that we provide. And SIM is not the only provider of systems thinking courses. There are at least a dozen more companies in Singapore that does the same. But we do have the Center for Systems Leadership, so we do position ourselves to be a credible partner for government agencies seeking to work either with their downstream partners. All right. So if you were the building construction authority, you will need to work with architects. You need to work with consultants. You will need to work with facility managers, facility management companies, right? So we look at the ecosystem and ask them, what do you need to be successful? And how would you communicate policy, translate that into things that you can collaborate with the industry at large, right? So for CEOs, they tend to like master classes, fireside chats, short, very short, couple of hours, or spread over a few intervals, every 2 months or so. Our 2 days essential system fundamentals is the go-to course for most of our organizations. And then you build from there, you scaffold the thinking to become a practitioner. And then we layer upon that coaching and the work of Jerry Cranes in terms of strategic organization as a parallel but complementary track to systems thinking. All right. So that's really the systems leadership offering from a capability development viewpoint. This is, if you like, the open enrollment canvas. So if you were a bespoke organization, if you were a government sector company coming to us with your specific needs, we would mix and match, plug and play something to your specific needs, right? So these are just the standard courses. So let's talk about how government agencies are using systems thinking. So this year, People's Association, I ran 2 classes of each 6 days. People's Association is an agency that's fairly important in terms of its link to the grassroots, right? So I don't know what's the equivalent in other countries, but they run something called community centers. So, every district, precinct, or we call, township would have a one or more community centers. This is where they organize programming for the residents, right? So in order to hear their point of view, their voices, create events for them, either at the town level or even national level, right? So these are the if you like the ear to the ground, and their charter is to enable strong ties between government and the population at large, right? So what we needed to work with them on was a structured approach to their Community 2030 plan, which has got a lot to do with how do you engage different stakeholder groups. All right. Up until now, perhaps Singapore's short history would have been fairly homogeneous, right? The last, if you like, 30, 40 years have been uh, pretty homogeneous set of people with same aspirations. You work hard, get a job, settle down, and you're good. But with millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, what have you, we see this diversity of people's aspirations, what they find meaning in, what purpose means for them, and it becomes increasingly challenging for an entity like People's Association to get a good sense of what's happening on the ground. All right. So systems thinking allows them to have a comprehensive um, uh, I would say set of initiatives that allows them to get to the different groups in a meaningful way. All right. So they have to rethink what is being offered in those community centers. How do we deal with cost of living? So they are the ones that provide, something called the community development vouchers, equivalent of a cash voucher that you can use in some of our local stores. All right. So this is one way that the government has decided to mitigate cost of living, and the operationalizing of that would be through something like People's Association in conjunction with other partners, of course, right? So systems thinking was offered to all directors and above in People's Association, all right? And we are working with NECLI, their training arm, to proliferate this to the training of the grassroots leaders, right? In other words, not just the staff of People's Association, but the grassroots leaders that the critical glue to the ground, training them as well in systems thinking. So that's the first government case study about their transformation. I mentioned about the National Council of Social Service. So this is interesting in that the training is not directly to the employees or the staff of the government agency. It is to their partners, or basically the companies they fund and govern. All right. So there is a Charities Act, and all these charities basically can go through the NCSS with a challenge statement which they are facing. So it could be, for example, managing of volunteers, could be leadership development, could be bus transportation for children, something as tactical as that, right? But when you scale that to all children needing bus transports, and we're talking about disadvantaged children, right? Right, then it becomes, something that would need to be worked across the ecosystem. So this is a fairly short but intense program to allow different social service agencies to take a problem they're facing, go through a workshop with us as facilitators over X number of days, Y number of coaching sessions, and then present this back to their management and the ministry. And if they like what they see, they could provide additional funding for those projects to be launched or executed, right? So in other words, over the last year, we have seen 23 such organizations and projects being hatched. And some of these are similar in terms of the scope, so they can you can get economies of scale by saying X, Y, and Z social service agencies needs to work on volunteers, but volunteers is a finite pool of people. So how do we go to them collectively, because we have similar agendas, so that we do not, like cannibalize each other, right? So these are fairly, essential conversations that can be had, but only if you have the vocabulary for it, right? So mental models, for example, is one of those things that they are trained in, so that you could have this container for change in the partnering. And yep, so back to BCA, right? So BCA is interesting because digitalization, sustainability in the build sector are huge issues, right? And they can't just mandate a policy and hope for the best, right? They really need to get through to the entire chain of companies involved in various parts of the build sector, and planning incentives, systemic structures that make for people to collaborate in clusters, how to incentivize for early adoption of technologies for, I don't know, cement, robotics, building, green buildings, what have you, right? So they took on systems thinking to identify gaps and reduce duplication of work across the ecosystem. And I think the lens and the frameworks help them to do some optimization. All right, so that's kind of the strategic intent. And next week, they'll be sending another new cohort of people dealing with lifts, right, to me, and we'll talk through their issues about lift maintenance and all that in a broader sense, right? And that's how we become very relevant to the companies or the government sector in this case, who are working with us to solve their specific issues and our problems. So beyond the training, we actually host, thought leadership conversations. So the Singapore 100, we're 60 years old, right? So thinking about the next 40 years, what does it look like? How do we mobilize the nation for nation building for the next 40 years, all right? You might be familiar with Odo Sharma, who came up with Theory U, right? So him, Daniel Kim, we had some of these sessions where they were speakers, facilitators, and basically we get the community of practitioners behind them and say, what can we do together that's at the system level, right? So this is not single organizations anymore. These are basically the collective. What else do we do? Well, we recently ran a roundtable for the healthcare sector. So this would be the primary care, your private healthcare, and then we try to get insurers, which is a very big part of the ecosystem, to have a conversation about what Healthier SG, which is an initiative of Singapore, how would we contribute if we brought in systems thinking, all right? So that's one on the bottom right. Prior to that, we have other roundtables, networking sessions, fireside chats, CEO, breakfast talks, that kind of thing, all right, which are fairly well received. I guess they find value in hearing each other's perspective. So for example, in the healthcare, there were two clusters being represented here, all right? Usually they don't talk very much to each other, but here they talk to the two clusters and also to private hospitals, which they won't have many opportunities to interact on a day-to-day basis. So that's what we try to do, and we use systems thinking to kind of like facilitate those conversations. So I mentioned a lot about helping people or companies do their um, or work on their problem statements. So what are the tools, right? So these three is like a minimum set, right? Levels of perspective, basically diagnosing from reactive events level to your systemic structures and what does that get to your vision? What's current reality? What's future reality? What's your theory of success? We use causal loops quite a bit. And then how do you intend to roll it out, right? So this applied learning is something that we do as a differentiator and the government agencies love it because they leave the course with a kind of like a blueprint or a plan of sorts. So it's not just academic skills or no, academic knowledge or just the skills of applying it, but having applied to a real case is something very satisfying for them. That's how a lesson plan looks like. Intact team coaching, right? We use coaching extensively to make sure that they are accurate and they are using the models in a robust manner and not a simplistic approach to just filling in boxes, right? So this can range anywhere from 1 month to 3 months, right? So they come back with some homework. We walk them through their deliverables and then refine it, and then they go on to implement it, come back with some more feedback, and so on and so forth, right? So that's how we build the team ability to navigate their own change and our projects. And just to finally say that we work across the entire hierarchy of ranks in an organization. We have board level interventions, the C-suite, management for sure, junior leaders, and less often, but we also deal with the new entrants, the new hires, the executives on the ground. Middle management is where we spend the most time and effort in, right? So that's pretty much how SIM and the various training providers in Singapore offer their systems thinking services to the community at large. So what's on the horizon is that we believe that the Civil Service College, as well as the government at large, has got these huge societal issues to think about, whether it's sustainability, whether it's AI. And I think what we want to do is to be a value-adding partner to them. So this is where I think the collaborations that SIM have with systems innovation and some of our other partners are important because we want to research into the downstream impact of such innovations around, say, AI, for example. I mentioned a little bit just now about the splicing work into small bits, right? Fragmentation of jobs due to parts of your work being AI enabled. So what do these mean to the landscape of manpower planning, or in terms of how different age groups, right, would deal with fractional time? It's something that's fairly important, and we want to apply the different lenses of systems thinking to it, right? So recently, Prof. Mike Jackson was in town, and he told us that you might want to look at the lens through societal, environment, through organismic, from purposeful, or even the mechanistic beyond your interrelation. So I said, okay, that's food for thought, and let's see what we can do to make sure that our systems thinking is more grounded in terms of the different lenses and not just on one school of thought, right? So what's in the horizon is for us to work with more partners in terms of strengthening our literature around systems thinking and the way forward to make it relevant to society. All right, so last month, a couple of weeks ago, we ran this navigating a Barney world, and we got the one of our ex-head of civil service to talk about futures, right? So he helms the Center for Strategic Futures, and we basically kind of like look into the crystal ball and see, what's ahead. How do we deal with this fractured world, uncertainty and complexity? So that's kind of like the types of things we do to ensure that the conversations remain relevant and current, and that we have a certain momentum to things, right? So we are certainly more than just a training provider, but we really want to add value to this body of work in systems thinking and making it something that the nation, the society, the communities, the companies can benefit. So thank you very much for your attention. I think I'm kind of like right on the dot at 5:40. Happy to take questions, Isaac, and anybody who has a comment to make a question, feel free. Thank you.
It was wonderful. Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, I really appreciate your time and the insights that you provided. I'll just open up to the group first. If anybody would like to jump in with a question, please do. Just come off mute and fire away.
Sorry, I'm losing audio for the time being. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry, Thomas. I was just asking if anyone in the audience wanted to jump off mute to ask a question.
Yeah, there's something in the chat. Maybe I can look at that. What is hard when one introduces and trains people and organization in systems thinking in Singapore? What is easy? That's an interesting question and a very salient one at that. Because let's look at how they have come to us, right? They usually said that, as part of our leadership development, we're looking around for something that would help our leaders perform better. Quite clueless, right? And you offer systems thinking, maybe, you could train some of our people in it, and then as part of their personal mastery, right? Sure, we can do that. And that's easy for us because you just send them to our open runs and you take away, a toolbox of different systems thinking models, and off you go and try to use it in your own environment. That's easy, but it's not systemic. Neither is it going to make impact on your organization if you are the only one who speaks that language. In fact, when you go back, you find yourself being very discouraged, and you try to kind of apply some of these things, it doesn't quite work because nobody else knows what you're talking about, right? So I would say that the ad hoc approach to systems thinking as a body of or as is a methodology for capability development needs to be intrinsically a multi-year effort, and that's difficult. All right, that's difficult for companies from an investment viewpoint and also from a availability viewpoint. I have this crazy conversation. I said, we have this 18-day course, right? And this is what it covers. Next question was, sure, I like this 18-day course. Can you kind of like compress it into 2 days? I said, sure. I'll just speak one sentence for each of these models and yeah, go ahead. Oh, you won't get anything of substance, right? So that's probably one of the hardest thing to do, right? How do you systematically bring systems thinking to the entire organization so they can collectively benefit from it? I can't speak for the EU cultures, but in as far as the individual goes, I think we are still fairly Asian, right? If there's such a thing. That really means that um, the voices are really hierarchical, top down, fairly bureaucratic. Organization transformation is driven from the top, and there's a change agenda. You guys just fall in line, right? So that's probably how we look at it. The respect to elders, although hugely seen in perhaps Korean and Japanese companies, in Singapore we are maybe a bit of confused bunch, right? We are Western in one way and Eastern in the other, right? So depending on which day of the week you ask me, we could be both, right? So it's interesting. But we are a blend of both cultures, which is why I think some years ago we say we are the bridge between the East and the West. Don't know how relevant is that now, but certainly something interesting there. Favorite book? Favorite book is I think I was schooled in systems dynamics, so the fifth discipline remains one of my favorite book, right? Because that's where I get the my base training from, right? Okay, so Martin, I hope I've answered some of your question. Yeah. Who else might have a question for me?
Joss has his hand up, and Philine and Gerald, if I've pronounced that correctly, both put a
Cheryl,
question
yeah.
in the chat. So
Yeah. Where in systems a change transformation require the most spending? I would assume you when you say spending, you mean the organization willingness to invest in systems change and transformation, right? And if that's the question, um, for government sector, it's quite different from private sector. Let me explain. In government sector, if you are a sector champion, say for example, you're NCSS for social sector, you're BCA for the build sector, where they would spend the most money for systems in thinking is how do I get my stakeholders to come on board and collaborate with me? And the spend is in terms of our grants and our incentives. Singapore is quite unique in that the government spends a lot of money on companies, right? Uh, and that means that tapping into the government grants and schemes is very important for companies because it goes directly to their bottom line, right? So it's if they were to spend on systems thinking, then I would imagine that the government agencies are using it from a leveling up the directorate ability to collaborate across. And this is not just single agency, this will be across agencies. So for example, if you're dealing with say the problem about national security, all right? Then you will need, okay, economic security, the economic development boards, the agencies looking at investments and so on and so forth, right? Temasek Foundation, I guess, Temasek investments, and then you will look across social sector's ability to be more resilient. So when you have these kind of conversations at ecosystems level, yeah, they would be willing to spend, provided you can get them together, right? The getting them together in the same room is a very tall order, all right? Because people will be very wary about who's there and who's not there, who needs to be there. So from our experience, that's not the easiest thing to do. So you want to be their trusted advisor? Yes. Yeah, but you must have the leverage and the networks to get the most important people in the room. Otherwise, your conversations are incomplete, right? So that's what I think is the case for Singapore. Do systems thinking and analytical thinking intersect? Definition, right? So it really depends on what you fall under analytical thinking and systems thinking. So we have a whole bunch of people who does systems thinking, design thinking, critical thinking, and transdisciplinary thinking. So it really depends on what you park what under. But we make available our syllabus and our curriculum to see what systems thinking cover. Increasingly, I morph into other areas, but as per the client needs. So for one Japanese company now, they are asking me to do systems thinking with things around change management, all right, and agile, lean. So it really depends on what they need, and then I'll need to kind of like string something together for them from a curricular development viewpoint. Yeah. So that's where we are. We basically get a client brief and then we work with them in terms of curating the multi-day agenda for whichever level of seniority they are targeting in terms of the audience. Maybe that's how I would answer that question. Back to you, Isaac.
Joss looks like he's got a question as well, I think.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Danielle. Yeah, it's interesting what you picked up on there around the cultural aspect of the Asian culture, and obviously there's other cultures around the world also, and how this fits with those or doesn't fit with those, and where you've adapted it to try and work in the context of Singapore. And yeah, there's different. You used a few terms there to describe Singaporean kind of culture and so forth. One that kind of pops out to me is a kind of managerial approach to things, the sense that you can kind of manage things. This is the way the government has kind of successfully done in the past, decades and so forth. And that's often quite kind of top down, and that you can plan and kind of predict everything. And we know in kind of complexity theory and some systems thinking, there's the idea of bottom up kind of emergence. So I wonder how you've kind of explored that, or have you tried to introduce that, or what are the potential or opportunity to kind of introduce the idea that there might be, different ways of doing things, and this idea of small pieces coming together and emergence might actually fit into it, or is there no kind of segue into that in the context that you're in?
Yeah. So I agree with you that we have been fairly top down in terms of approaching things. And look, I mean, the government in Singapore, we have one government, in our entire history of independence, right? So we have that predictability, which makes for us as citizens to kind of like vote in the ruling party because they've done good work, right? But increasingly, the diversity of different aspirations, expectations, make it harder, right? Makes it harder for to have that collective voice, which is why it is important and has been done this what we call national conversations, right? So you pick a topic and then you put it out there, you facilitate thousands and thousands of people to get their views, right? But it's still a facilitated process, right? To get this real number of people putting their perspectives across. Ground up initiatives tends to be more evident in causes, CAUSES, right? So if you feel strongly for a certain community or a certain global issue, and these can be bottom up. You can also have bottom up issues for which you can seek funding for. Right, so Singapore is great when if you have a good idea and the respective agency thinks is good, they can fund you for your ground up efforts. So it's not lack of avenues, Josh. It's just that perhaps people are just too caught up in their own lives to do this on a active basis as a population as a percentage of population. Not enough people are doing that. Maybe that's the way I would put it.
A quick question, and I know Martin's just dropped a question in as well, but it's actually about the childhood education. So, I mean, I know we've spoken about sort of tertiary education here, but does Singapore teach these concepts at what I would call primary school? So, age 6 to age 12 or age 18 in those childhood years at all? Or is it just beyond schooling that they would start to learn these concepts?
On systems thinking?
Yeah,
Yeah. So K-12 doesn't have that in the curriculum for sure, right?
Mhm.
The private institutions like INSEAD, which we were talking about, right? They offer a version of systems thinking for their international baccalaureate program, right? So that is age 17, right? Interestingly, even within SIM, we're not offering this to the undergraduates, right? Which is a topic for a different conversation. But I recognize this because the degrees are conferred by the partner university, so RMIT or whatever it is we facilitate for that to happen. But if you ask me, financial literacy and systems thinking are two very important things to be included in some curriculum at some point, right? It just hasn't happened in any way yet, not that I know of, at least. Yeah. Going to Martin's question. Is existential disconnect may happen? Yeah, I'm with you there, Martin, and I think that is a uh, a cause for concern. Although when we say hierarchical organizations, it does not mean that it is a repressive organization. So I like to make that clear. The hierarchical just means that there is a respect for the rank, right? If you've grown up, I mean, this person has from him to have made manager, to make director, to have made the COO, whatever it is, they kind of like say, okay, you've done your time and therefore you're out there. We're quite happy to follow your lead. But this works if you are in a predictable environment and your operating external environment is not changing faster than your internal environment. The problem now is that the external environment is changing faster than internal environment, and the new stuff that comes around, starting from computing to digitalization to now AI, is that the older generation is no longer able to draw on experience to lead. So we play the NASA game to tell you that if you haven't been there before, anybody's perspective is probably just as equally valid, right? Because you can't draw on experience. Then the question is, how ready is that organization to morph itself from a hierarchical one to a more, distributed and where decision making is a more collective process rather than a I know it better process, right? So I think this is happening, but as you know, large ships, takes time to, to navigate, to use the rudder to move a large ship takes a lot of effort and much time. So have we seen it in a big way? Not yet, but that's what the government is asking us to do all the time, right? Every company needs to transform, right? That's the mantra. The how is not so clear, right? The how is you need to go for skills upgrading, but what skills upgrading, right? So I think that's still there's a gap and there's a challenge out there, and we need systems thinking. We need other forms of intervention to bridge this rapid Barney world or Pluto world, as you call it, in terms of the realities, because the time to act is getting shorter and shorter. And hierarchical, all of us know, is not well designed for making fast decisions. Yeah.
Might just quickly, because it's quite relevant, Thomas, and we were discussing this before we kicked off the session. You had a question on systems thinking and the influence of that on the evolution of AI in the public sector.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can say in a minute or so a few quick words on that.
So the 1 minute response is that AI is used as a workflow productivity intervention for now in governments, right? And that one is easy to manage, right? Think of it as a huge repository. Instead of Googling, now you can Google internally. Simple mindset. But that's not where AI's real power is, right? And I think the public sector needs to rethink what AI means, not for itself necessarily, but what AI means for the workforce. All right. And in other words, each workforce, how would different roles, what does job definition means, and what does this transactional or splice of time means in terms of the way you design policies. That's not fully evolved yet, and we're gonna work together on this. And that's actually an area of work I'd like to work with you guys on. So with that, maybe I conclude the session.
It's fantastic. Thank you again, Thomas. It was really really useful to hear that your experience, and appreciate your experience in answering all the questions that were posted there as well. I will close here, but thank you all for joining us in this session. Keep an eye out for the next session as well. We are talking about running a lab as potentially one of our next sessions. So it'll be a series of sessions. More on that will be coming out on the SI Governance Hub website and LinkedIn and some of those channels. So if you're interested, keep an eye out there. Also, be sure to join the SI Network Governance Hub. That's where we post a lot of our updates. And we'll hopefully see you all again soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Isaac. Thanks, Thomas. Take care.